Fair warning, this gets absolutely insane. The kind of scorched earth, nuclear-level revenge that doesn't happen in a burst of rage, but in months of quiet planning while everyone around you thinks you've already lost. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning in October, in my own kitchen, the one I'd painted myself, the one where I paid the mortgage, the one where the sunlight hit the granite counter just right and made everything look calmer than it was. I was holding my black coffee in my favorite ceramic mug, thumb-scrolling headlines on my tablet, when my front door, unlocked because I still believed in normal life, opened. A complete stranger walked in. No knock, no doorbell, no, sorry, wrong house. Just a woman I'd never seen before, gliding across my entryway like she owned the air. She had that smug, polished smile people wear when they think they're about to win on camera. Behind her, my husband of 12 happy years trailed in like a shadow, pretending he wasn't there. Eyes lowered, phone in hand, acting busy, but watching my face the way you watch a fuse burn down. The woman leaned against my kitchen door frame, crossed her ankles like a cheap movie villain, and said, in a voice so casual it made my stomach go cold, "He's coming with me tonight. He's not staying with you anymore. Deal with it." My husband didn't correct her, didn't even flinch, just stood there, breathing shallow, waiting for my breakdown like it was a show they'd paid for. I could feel it, my pulse climbing, my throat tightening, heat rushing up my neck. They wanted the full performance. Screaming, sobbing, begging, maybe me throwing my mug against the wall. They wanted humiliation theater, a story they could laugh about later. Instead, I set my mug down, slowly, carefully. The ceramic barely whispered against the stone. I looked straight into her eyes without blinking. Then I said 2 words in the calmest voice I could find inside my chest. Noted, understood. Silence hit the room, like a heavy door closing. Their smiles twitched, confused, brittle. They exchanged quick glances, suddenly unsure whether I was in shock or whether I'd just declared war without raising my voice. And the truth is, right then, they had no idea what they'd just triggered. I'm 39 years old, an operations director at a mid-sized logistics company. Practical, organized, not impulsive, not dramatic. The kind of woman who builds quietly and fixes what's broken without asking for applause. I met Daniel when I was 27. He was charming in that soft-spoken way, never the loudest man in the room, but the one who made steady eye contact and asked thoughtful questions. We met at a mutual friend's engagement party. He offered me a glass of wine and said, "You look like someone who hates small talk." I laughed. He was right. He proposed 2 years later. Simple ring, private dinner, no theatrics, just him across the table, nervous, saying, "I want to build something real with you." And we did. Or at least, I believed we did. 12 years of marriage, a house we renovated together, vacations carefully budgeted, late night takeout on the couch, arguments about laundry. Normal life. Daniel worked in finance, steady salary, respectable reputation. I handled most of the household structure, bills, planning, investments, long-term savings, not because he was incapable, but because I was better at it, more meticulous, more cautious. Looking back, there were signs, tiny fractures in the glass. He started staying late at the office about 8 months ago. Quarter-end reporting, he said. Audit season. His tone always casual. I never doubted him. I had no reason to. His phone became an extension of his hand. Face down on tables. New passcode. Company policy update, he told me. I nodded. He laughed less at my jokes, touched me less in passing, kissed my forehead instead of my lips, but nothing dramatic enough to set off alarms. His mother, however, had always been observant. Too observant. "You work too much," she once told me over Sunday dinner. "A man needs attention." I smiled politely. "A man also needs mortgage payments." Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, but he didn't correct her. That was another small fracture. There were more. 3 months ago, he started going to the gym again. New clothes, new cologne. He hadn't cared about cologne in years. Trying to get healthy, he said. I believed him. Because I trusted the life we had built. And because I never imagined he would risk it all for something so reckless. The cruel irony? 5 years earlier, he had sat at this same kitchen table, crying because he'd made a financial mistake at work. Misallocated funds. Small discrepancy that could have turned into a scandal. I stayed up 3 nights straight helping him review spreadsheets. I covered the shortfall from my own savings so no client would be harmed. I protected his reputation when it could have shattered. I don't deserve you, he had whispered into my shoulder. I thought that meant something. I didn't know that gratitude fades when desire shows up in red lipstick and high heels. The woman who walked into my house that Tuesday morning, her name, I later learned, was Vanessa, had been in his life for 8 months. 8 months of dinners I thought were business meetings. 8 months of hotel receipts buried in expense reports. 8 months of private jokes about me. But at that moment in the kitchen, I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was this. The man I had defended, protected, built with, stood silently while another woman announced she was taking him away like borrowed property. And he let her. That silence told me everything and nothing. After they walked out that morning, the house didn't feel empty. It felt rearranged. The air was heavier, the silence louder. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. I stood there for a long time, staring at the front door they had just closed behind them. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked composed, almost detached. But inside, something had shifted, not shattered. Shifted. I didn't scream. I didn't call him. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I replayed the last 8 months in my mind, frame by frame. The late meetings, the gym sessions, the sudden insistence on space, the way he'd started criticizing small things about me, my tone, my schedule, the way I loaded the dishwasher. You're always in control, he had said one night. It's exhausting. At the time, I'd apologized. Now I realized he needed me to feel flawed so he could justify what he was already doing. That afternoon, I opened our shared laptop. Not because I was suspicious, because I needed clarity. Daniel had never been good with technology. He reused passwords, synced everything across devices, trusted default settings. And that trust, ironically, was my first piece of leverage. His old cloud storage account was still logged in. Folders, backups, archived messages. I clicked. Thousands of messages, 8 months worth. Vanessa's name repeated over and over like a stain you can't scrub out. I didn't read everything at once. I couldn't. My chest tightened too quickly. But I read enough. Photos of them at restaurants he had told me were client dinners. Jokes about my predictable routines. Intimate messages sent at 1:17 a.m. while he lay beside me pretending to sleep. One message froze me completely. She has no idea. She trusts me completely, Vanessa replied with a laughing emoji. I closed the laptop gently. Still no screaming, just breathing. I walked into our bedroom and opened his closet. Half his clothes were gone. He'd planned this. He hadn't just reacted impulsively to something. This was strategic, which meant my response needed to be the same. That night, his mother called. Her voice was syrupy sweet. Daniel is very confused right now, she said. You know how sensitive he is. Sensitive. That word almost made me laugh. He needs someone who understands him, she continued carefully. Maybe you've both grown in different directions. Translation? It's your fault. I listened quietly. Didn't argue. Because I was starting to understand something very important. Everyone assumed I was the stable one. The predictable one, the reasonable one. They mistook composure for weakness. And that was their first mistake. Later that evening, Daniel finally texted, I'm staying at Vanessa's for now. We'll talk soon. No apology. No explanation. Just logistics. I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I typed back, understood. Same tone as the kitchen. Same calm. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't reacting because I was processing. And once I process something fully, I don't explode. I execute. That night, instead of crying myself to sleep, I drove somewhere I hadn't visited in years. A building my late Uncle Frank left me. An old brick office structure downtown. A place filled with dusty filing cabinets, heavy safes, and secrets he used to call insurance policies. I hadn't thought about it in almost a decade. But as I stood in front of its locked door, keys cold in my palm, I felt something settle inside me. If Daniel and Vanessa wanted theater, they had just stepped onto a stage they didn't understand, and I was done being the audience. The building still smelled the same. Dust, old paper, metal drawers that hadn't been opened in years. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the echo of my heels against concrete sounded louder than it should have. The space was dim, lit only by the street lamp glow filtering through high windows. Uncle Frank had called. I never asked more. Now I wished I had. 4 industrial filing cabinets lined the back wall. Heavy brass locks. An enormous safe sat in the corner, like something out of a bank vault. Banker boxes stacked to the ceiling, each labeled in his neat handwriting. Names, dates, reference numbers. I found the keyring in the desk drawer exactly where he'd told me it would be, years ago, when he'd handed it to me at his will reading. You never know when information becomes currency, he had said. I remember thinking he was dramatic. He wasn't. I opened the first cabinet. It wasn't random paperwork. It was leverage, photographs, signed statements, financial discrepancies, recorded transcripts, proof of corruption from people who publicly preached integrity, city officials, business owners, corporate executives, decades of carefully gathered insurance policies. Uncle Frank hadn't been reckless. He'd been patient. He never used anything unless he had to. I stood there in that quiet building, realizing something profound. Power isn't loud. It's documented. Hours passed. I moved methodically. No panic. No tears. At some point near midnight, my phone buzzed. Daniel, I think we should talk tomorrow. Vanessa feels uncomfortable about the way you reacted. The way I reacted. I stared at the message. I hadn't yelled, hadn't insulted, hadn't begged. My calm had unsettled them more than rage ever could. I typed back, tomorrow works. Then I went back to opening drawers. Around 2 a.m, I took a break and finally opened my own laptop again, the one synced to our shared devices. I told myself I was gathering facts. That's what strong women do. They gather facts. What I found was worse than the messages. Vanessa had sent him a photo the night before she walked into my kitchen. A mirror selfie in my hallway. She must have taken it while I was upstairs asleep. Caption, tomorrow we make it official. Below that, Daniel had replied, she'll break, but she'll survive. Break. Like I was a piece of furniture. My throat tightened, but my face remained still. I scrolled further. Bank transfers. Small ones. Irregular. Vanessa worked in accounting at a mid-sized firm. The name rang a bell because 5 years ago, Daniel had come to me shaken about a client discrepancy he had helped a colleague cover quietly. That colleague had been a woman. Different company, different context. But the pattern was similar. I opened our old encrypted folder, the one containing documents from that crisis 5 years ago. His mistake. The one I had covered. Except now, reviewing the timestamps and cross-referencing with new transfers in Vanessa's messages, something clicked into place. Daniel hadn't made that mistake alone. He had been protecting someone even back then. And based on message dates, Vanessa had been at the same firm at the time, which meant the emotional affair hadn't started 8 months ago. It had roots, deep ones. My phone buzzed again. This time, a call, I answered. Why didn't you react? Daniel asked immediately. No greeting. His voice was tight. React how? I asked calmly. Anything. You just said understood. Vanessa thinks you're planning something. I almost smiled. Are you? He pressed. I leaned back in Uncle Frank's old leather chair. Daniel, I said softly, you walked into my house with another woman and announced you were leaving. What exactly were you expecting? Silence. Then defensiveness. You've been distant for months. You're always working. You make everything about structure and control. So this was the narrative. I let him talk. He needed to believe this was emotional. He needed to believe I was wounded but powerless. I don't want this to get ugly, he added carefully. We can divide assets fairly. Divide. The word echoed. I had handled every investment, every trust, every property document, every long-term asset allocation. He thought he understood our finances. He didn't. I ended the call with the same calm tone. We'll discuss everything properly. When I hung up, I opened the safe. Inside were sealed envelopes labeled with names I recognized, including one bearing the name of Vanessa's firm. My pulse slowed instead of quickened. That's when I realized something crucial. They believed the incident in my kitchen was the climax. It wasn't. It was the trigger. And the real escalation hadn't even begun. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was spiraling, because I was recalculating. There's a difference. At 6 a.m, I drove home, showered, put on a charcoal gray suit, and went to work like any other Wednesday. No swollen eyes, no trembling hands, just routine. My assistant glanced up when I walked in. Morning, Miss Carter. Morning. My voice didn't waver. Inside, though, there was a quiet interrogation happening. What did I miss? When did I start ignoring instinct? Was I too confident? Too secure? The dangerous thing about betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the rewriting of memory. I replayed moments I once labeled as ordinary. The night he insisted on opening a new private investment account without my review. The way he brushed off questions about certain expenses. The time I noticed a $12,000 transfer and he told me it was a temporary liquidity move. I had trusted him because I believed partnership meant transparency. That belief had cost me. At lunch, I received a message from him. We should meet tonight. Neutral place. Neutral. As if our entire marriage had been a negotiation. I agreed. We met at a quiet wine bar downtown. Dim lighting, soft music. The kind of place people choose when they want to pretend civility. He looked tired, not remorseful, tired. Vanessa wasn't there. He sat across from me, hands clasped. I didn't plan for it to happen like this, he began. It never does, I replied. He exhaled sharply. Vanessa and we connect in ways you and I stopped connecting. Stopped. As if connection expires like milk. You've changed, he added. You're colder. Everything is about efficiency with you. I studied him carefully. You're asking for divorce? I asked. He hesitated. I think it's best. There it was. Clear. Official. I nodded once. I won't contest it. That surprised him. I thought you'd fight, he admitted. For what? I asked quietly. A man who brought another woman into my kitchen? His jaw tightened. I'm not your enemy, Daniel. That confused him more. He leaned forward. We'll split assets 50-50. The house, the investments, fair division. There it was again. Fair. He truly believed he was entitled to half of everything I had structured and protected. I'll have my attorney contact yours, I said. He blinked. You already talked to an attorney? I'm not emotional, I reminded him softly. I'm organized. That hit him differently. For the first time that evening, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. He reached for his glass but didn't drink. You're not going to make this difficult, right? I held his gaze. No, Daniel. I'm not going to make anything difficult. Because difficulty implies resistance. And I wasn't resisting. I was repositioning. When I left the restaurant, I sat in my car for a long moment. That was when the emotion finally cracked through. Not rage. Grief. 12 years is not a small investment. It's birthdays, it's holidays, it's shared passwords and shared dreams. I let myself cry for exactly 5 minutes. No more. Then I wiped my face, opened my phone, and called my attorney. Start the restructuring process, I said calmly. All of it. There was a pause on the other end. You're certain? Yes. Within hours, documents were drafted, trusts activated, ownership transfers initiated, legal frameworks tightened. Everything that existed jointly would be reassigned through mechanisms Daniel had never bothered to understand. Not illegally. Strategically. If he wanted fairness, he was about to learn what technical fairness actually looked like. That night, he texted again. Vanessa thinks you're being too calm. She says it's unsettling. I stared at the message, then typed back, good. Because here's what they still didn't understand. I wasn't reacting out of heartbreak anymore. I was responding to disrespect. And once respect is gone, what remains is structure. And I am very good at structure. The first domino fell 48 hours later. Daniel called me from a boutique downtown. His voice, usually measured and confident, sounded thin. Something's wrong with the accounts, he said. My card just got declined. I closed the file I was reviewing at work and leaned back in my chair. That's strange, I replied calmly. Did you try another one? I tried 3, he snapped. They're all frozen, even the business credit line. I let a pause stretch. Maybe it's a fraud alert, I suggested mildly. Silence on his end. I could hear background murmurs, cash register beeps, fabric rustling, the unmistakable humiliation of public financial failure. I'm standing at the counter, Elena, he hissed. People are staring. He hadn't called me Elena in months. Not like that. Not urgently. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I'll have my attorney forward clarification, I said, since we're restructuring assets. Restructuring? His voice cracked slightly. Yes. Then I ended the call. Because explanations are privileges. By that afternoon, every joint account we had ever shared was legally closed. Funds transferred into layered trust structured under my name as sole beneficiary. The house deed already filed for reassignment. Investment portfolios consolidated. Retirement accounts separated under marital protection clauses he had never read. Everything executed through clean, documented channels. No drama. Just paperwork. That evening, his mother called. What have you done? She demanded, skipping pleasantries. Protected myself, I answered. You're being vindictive. No, I corrected gently. I'm being prepared. She inhaled sharply. Daniel says you froze everything. Daniel says many things. She lowered her voice as if shifting tactics. Vanessa is very upset. She thinks you're trying to ruin him. Interesting. Not concerned about her son. Concerned about the other woman's discomfort. I smiled faintly. I haven't ruined anyone, I said. Actions have consequences. The call ended without resolution. But escalation doesn't move in straight lines. It branches. 2 days later, an anonymous compliance tip was submitted to the licensing board overseeing Vanessa's accounting firm. The documentation included irregular transaction patterns, historical discrepancies dating back 5 years, patterns Daniel himself had once asked me to help cover. None of it falsified, just reorganized, highlighted, contextualized. Within 72 hours, her firm initiated an internal audit. Daniel showed up at the house unannounced that evening. He still had a key. For now. He looked exhausted. What did you send them? He demanded the moment I opened the door. I stepped aside, calmly. Come in. He paced the living room like a trapped animal. They're reviewing old files, transactions from years ago. Vanessa's freaking out. I imagine she is. You told me you weren't going to make this difficult. I'm not, I said quietly. I'm making it transparent. His eyes hardened. You're trying to destroy her. No, I corrected again. I'm allowing systems to function. He stopped pacing. You covered for me once, he said, voice dropping. You protected me. Yes, I said. And now? Now I'm protecting myself. He stared at me like he was seeing someone unfamiliar, because the version of me he knew had been loyal, patient, forgiving. But loyalty ends when respect does. I never thought you were capable of this, he muttered. That almost made me laugh. Capable of what? I asked softly. Reading documents? His jaw tightened. You think this makes you powerful? No, I replied. It makes me safe. 3 days later, the next domino fell. The building housing Vanessa's favorite cafe, where she and Daniel had apparently spent many afternoons during business lunches, was sold quietly. Through a family trust, mine. The previous owner had been trying to sell for months. My cash offer had closed in 8 days. Perfectly legal, perfectly timed. As the new property owner, I conducted a standard market rate review. Rents in the area had increased significantly. Lease agreements allowed adjustment with 30 days notice. Triple the rate. Effective immediately. Vanessa's cafe wasn't owned by her, but by Daniel's new best friend, the man who had walked into my kitchen. And he had leveraged heavily to start that business. 30 days, or vacate. Daniel called again that night. "This is insane," he said. "He'll lose everything." I listened carefully to the phrasing. He, not we, not Vanessa. He. "I thought you said I should deal with it," I said evenly. Silence. He remembered. The kitchen. The smirk. The words. "You're taking it too far," he whispered. "No," I said calmly. "You just underestimated how far I could go without shouting." Meanwhile, the audit at Vanessa's firm intensified. Historical discrepancies reopened. Client accounts reviewed. Emails resurfaced. Even Daniel's name appeared in correspondence. Circumstantial, but concerning. His corporate employer, already uneasy about his declining performance, initiated their own review. 2 investigations running parallel, 2 stress fractures widening. Vanessa began calling him repeatedly, according to mutual acquaintances. They were arguing, blaming each other. The romantic narrative was cracking under pressure. And I never raised my voice. I never sent threats. I simply allowed the structure of truth to unfold. And truth, when properly organized, is heavier than rage. 3 weeks into this quiet collapse, Daniel texted, "Can we meet? Alone?" I agreed. Because escalation had reached the point where desperation begins. And desperation changes people. I was curious to see which version of him would show up. The confident defector, or the frightened man realizing that actions echo longer than they expect. We met in the same wine bar, same table, same dim lighting. But he looked different, less certain, less composed. The sharp confidence he'd worn that Tuesday morning was gone. In its place, anxiety. He didn't order wine this time. "Elena," he began, voice lower than usual. "This has spiraled." I folded my hands calmly on the table. "Spiraled from what?" I asked. He ran a hand through his hair. "Vanessa's firm suspended her pending investigation. They froze her accounts. She's blaming me. My job, HR is reviewing old expense reports. They think I was coordinating transfers." I held his gaze. "Were you?" I asked quietly. He flinched. "I didn't think it would come back like this," he said. "It was years ago. We corrected everything." We. There it was again. The partnership he never admitted until it benefited him. He leaned forward. "I need you to call off whatever you started." That sentence almost broke something in me. Not from anger, but from exhaustion. He still believed I was orchestrating chaos. He still didn't understand that all I had done was remove protection. "I didn't start anything," I said softly. "I stopped shielding you." His jaw tightened. "You're punishing me." "No," I said. "I'm stepping aside." Silence stretched between us. For the first time since that morning in the kitchen, I felt something crack inside me. Not power. Loneliness. Because beneath all of this, beneath the structure and strategy, there was a simple truth. I had loved him. Not strategically, not cautiously, fully. And now I was sitting across from a man who viewed me as an obstacle. "You could end this," he pressed. I looked at him carefully. "End what, Daniel? The audit? The lease agreement? Corporate compliance reviews?" He swallowed. The pressure. The word lingered. Pressure. I exhaled slowly. "You brought a woman into my home," I said quietly. "You stood there while she humiliated me. You asked me to divide everything I built like it was an inconvenience." His eyes flickered, not with remorse, but with discomfort. "I didn't think you'd respond like this." "That's the problem," I replied. "You didn't think." That night, I drove home and finally let myself feel it. The house was quiet. Too quiet. His shoes still by the door, half his clothes gone, the indent on his side of the mattress still visible. I sat on the edge of the bed and let tears fall. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. Because this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about illusion. I had believed we were equals, partners, but somewhere along the way, he began resenting the very stability I provided. And instead of confronting that resentment, he outsourced validation. The darkest part wasn't losing him. It was realizing he had quietly rewritten our marriage in his head long before I knew it was collapsing. The next morning, news spread through mutual friends. Vanessa had moved out of the apartment she shared with Daniel. Temporarily, they said. He was staying at a short-term rental. Her former cafe landlord had begun eviction proceedings after the rent hike. Her professional license review escalated to potential disciplinary action. Their once bold relationship was now under strain, and for a brief moment, I questioned myself. Had I gone too far? Was this justice or ego? I sat in my car outside the old brick building downtown and stared at its facade. Uncle Frank's words echoed in my memory. Information becomes currency when you know when to spend it. Had I spent too much or just enough? The wind moved across the empty street. Quiet. Neutral. I closed my eyes and inhaled. This wasn't about destroying them. It was about never being powerless again. But power has a cost. And in that quiet moment, sitting alone with my decisions, I felt it fully. Heavy. Real. Irreversible. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with paperwork. 3 days after that dinner, I received a call. Not from Daniel, not from Vanessa, but from a compliance officer at her former firm. Her voice was neutral, professional. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "we're conducting a historical audit. We understand you may have personal knowledge of certain transactions from 5 years ago." I leaned back in my office chair. "Yes," I said calmly, "I do." There was a pause. "We've uncovered discrepancies tied to client escrow accounts. Funds temporarily redirected before being restored. We're trying to determine whether this was isolated error or coordinated activity." Coordinated. The word settled in the air. "Documentation exists," I replied. "Signed statements, internal notes. I retained copies." I didn't offer more. Silence stretched. "Would you be willing to submit those documents formally?" she asked. "Yes." And just like that, the narrative shifted. Until then, Daniel and Vanessa believed this was personal retaliation. Emotional fallout. But once compliance departments get involved, it becomes institutional, clinical, bigger than heartbreak. That afternoon, Daniel showed up again. This time he didn't pace. He stood still in the living room, eyes rimmed red. "They're investigating criminal liability," he said quietly. "Vanessa's lawyer thinks there's exposure. They're asking if I knew about the transfers." I studied him carefully. "Did you?" I asked again. He looked away. "It wasn't like that." That wasn't an answer. He took a shaky breath. "You kept copies?" he asked. "Yes." "For what? Insurance?" "No," I said. "For clarity." He stepped closer. "You're going to let them destroy her." I met his eyes. She destroyed herself the moment she thought she was untouchable. That landed differently. He looked smaller somehow, less defiant. "She says you've always been calculating," he muttered. I almost smiled. "I've always been prepared." Silence fell. Then he asked the question that mattered. "What do you want?" It wasn't accusation this time. It was surrender. I considered that carefully. "I want you to understand something," I said slowly. "I didn't ruin your career. I didn't forge documents. I didn't falsify records. I didn't open side accounts." He swallowed. "You did." The room was very still. "And I covered for you," I continued, "because I believed in loyalty." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "You're not covering me anymore." No. That was the turning point. Not the audits, not the eviction notices, not the asset transfers. It was that word, no. For the first time in 12 years, I was no longer protecting him from consequences. Later that week, the cafe officially shut down. Rent unpaid, lease terminated. Vanessa's suspension became public record. Daniel's employer placed him on administrative leave pending investigation. And something unexpected happened. Her mother called me. Not angry, not accusatory, tired. "I didn't know," she said quietly. about the old accounts. I'm sure you didn't, I replied. She thought she was fixing a temporary problem. Temporary problems become permanent when ignored. A long pause. She told me you're vindictive. I considered that. No, I said gently. I'm done absorbing damage. That evening, alone in my house, I stood in the kitchen where it all began. The same granite counter, the same ceramic mug. I realized something crucial. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was correction. Daniel texted me late that night. I underestimated you. I stared at the message for a long moment, then replied, yes. No anger, no insult, just truth. Because the real power shift had nothing to do with property or audits. It was internal. For years, I had been the steady one, the stabilizer, the fixer, the silent absorber of chaos. Now, I was the boundary. And once boundaries are established, they change everything. The collapse wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. Daniel's administrative leave turned into termination within 2 weeks. Official reason? Violation of fiduciary trust and failure to disclose material financial involvement. Corporate language is cold, efficient, final. He called me the day he cleared out his office. They escorted me out, he said quietly, like I was dangerous. I didn't respond immediately. I remember when you told me humiliation builds character, I said softly. Do you remember that? Silence. He had said that once, during an argument about a presentation I'd struggled with years ago. He didn't answer. Vanessa's case progressed faster than expected. Internal audit findings were forwarded to the state licensing board. Civil complaints from former clients began surfacing once irregularities became public. The same people who once praised her attention to detail now questioned her integrity. Her phone stopped ringing. The friends who had toasted their bravery disappeared. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were fighting constantly. Blame shifting. You said she'd never react. You said she was too composed. You said she'd just sign papers and move on. They had built their confidence on a miscalculation. They thought composure meant surrender. They thought patience meant weakness. The cafe closure hit harder than Daniel expected. The owner, his friend, the one who had leaned against my kitchen doorway, tried to negotiate. But contracts are clear when written correctly. Triple rent. 30 days. Failure to pay results in eviction. He couldn't sustain it. Equipment repossessed. Staff dismissed. Lease terminated. One afternoon, I drove past the building. The windows were dark. The for lease sign already posted. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply noted it. At home, Daniel asked to meet one final time to discuss settlement terms. We sat across from each other at the dining table. No wine bar this time. No dim lighting. Just documents. You've secured everything, he said flatly. Everything that was legally mine, I corrected. He looked exhausted. You planned this, he whispered. No, I replied calmly. I prepared for it. He rubbed his face. I thought you'd fight emotionally. I didn't think you'd fight structurally. That sentence stayed with me, emotionally. Structurally. He had expected tears. He got paperwork. Why didn't you scream? He asked suddenly. Because screaming would have made you feel powerful. Instead, I said, because screaming doesn't move assets. That broke something in him. For the first time, I saw regret. Not for the affair, but for underestimating me. I never meant to destroy you, he said quietly. You didn't, I replied. He looked up, confused. You tried to humiliate me, I continued. Destruction was collateral. He signed the divorce papers without argument. No 50-50 split, no courtroom battle. He didn't have leverage, and he finally knew it. Weeks later, I heard Vanessa had moved into a small studio apartment on the outskirts of town. Temporary retail job while awaiting the outcome of her license hearing. Daniel was renting a furnished sublet. 2 separate lives. No more triumphant entrances. No more smug announcements. Just consequences. One afternoon, his mother called again, her voice softer this time. I didn't realize how much you held together, she admitted. I almost laughed at that. It wasn't about holding things together, I said. It was about being invisible while doing it. A pause. I suppose we all misjudged you. Yes, I said gently, you did. And that was the true fallout. Not just financial collapse, not just professional ruin, but the dismantling of assumptions. They thought I was dependent. I was foundational. They thought I was replaceable. I was structural. The most ironic part, I never once shouted, never threatened, never begged. I simply removed protection and let gravity do the rest. One evening, I returned to the old brick building downtown. Renovations had begun. Market shifts were favoring the area. Property values climbing steadily. Uncle Frank's investment, once dismissed as obscure, was now prime real estate. I walked through the quiet hallways and felt something settle. Not triumph. Not revenge. Balance. They wanted one dramatic morning in my kitchen. They got a lifetime of consequences instead. And I finally understood the difference between reacting and responding. It's been 11 months since that Tuesday morning. The kitchen looks the same. Granite counter, ceramic mug. October light slanting through the window, just the way it always did. But I'm different. The divorce finalized quietly. No courtroom drama, no public spectacle, just signatures and silence. Daniel and I haven't spoken in months. I heard he's trying to rebuild, consulting contract work, temporary positions. Vanessa's license hearing is still pending. Her name surfaces occasionally in professional forums, usually attached to cautionary discussions about internal controls. Their story continues. But it no longer intersects with mine. The old brick building downtown, fully renovated, leased to 3 legitimate firms and 1 creative studio. Stable tenants, market-aligned contracts, clean systems. It's profitable, predictable, mine. Sometimes I stand in that building and think about Uncle Frank's words. Information becomes currency when you know when to spend it. He was right. But here's what I've learned beyond that. Power isn't about destruction. It's about boundaries. That morning in my kitchen, when Vanessa told me to deal with it, they thought they were humiliating me. What they didn't understand is this. Calm is not surrender. Silence is not weakness. And a woman who stops reacting emotionally doesn't become powerless. She becomes deliberate. I didn't ruin anyone's life. I stopped protecting them from their own choices. There's a difference. Revenge is loud. Justice is patient. And the most dangerous thing you can underestimate is a woman who knows exactly what she's capable of and chooses not to show it until necessary. If you ever find yourself in a room where someone expects you to break, set your cup down gently, look them in the eye, and say, understood, then go build your structure. Because the real power move is walking away stable while the people who tried to shake you collapse under their own weight. And that is permanent.